Sentence in Binary Code by Christopher Priest. Originally published in the August 1971 issue of Fantastic magazine. Republished in 3 collections of the author's stories, a German-language one in 1973, a Dutch one in 1978, and Real-Time World in 1974. Read by Darrell T. Smith II from my channel, Quasar Spectra. Sentence in Binary Code. If you're going to lose your body, then the Institute of Corrective Therapy would seem to be as good a place as any. That's where Joseph Turatsky lost his, at least. After a short imprisonment, they told him he was what they called politically undesirable, and conducted him under heavy guard to the Institute's HQ in Greenland. Properly applied corrective therapy, they told him, was what he needed. The panacea for sedition, they called it. But it had to be done properly, and they knew all about that. The precise method was discovered by Turatsky on his second day. After a night in a cell, he was taken to a room remarkable for its air of stark functionality. Here they strapped him to a bench, gave him an intravenous injection, then connected his wrists, ankles, and cranium to a complicated set of electrodes. Then someone pulled a switch set into a wall, and everything, as the saying goes, went black. Turatsky hung in a timeless, spaceless void for an eternity. Then a voice said in his ear, "Hi, bub." He tried to look around, but was severely inconvenienced by what felt like a sudden lack of a head. In panic, he tried to struggle, then gave that up too. He didn't have a body either. But he had heard a voice, pretty remarkable for someone who had recently discovered he had no head, and hence, presumably, no ears. A good trick, that, but how was it done? The voice said, "No trick, friend. It's all done by electronics. The experts call it a digital micropulse. And that's what you think you're hearing. But don't think of it as a voice. You've lost that for good. We all have." Turatsky considered this for a moment. "We?" he thought experimentally. "That's right. You and I, and approximately 2,000 others, are in electronically stimulated mental contact with each other. Then where are all the others?" "They're working, bub. We do a 12-hour shift here." The voice seemed to be very close. "Want to see yourself?" it said suddenly. At once a flash of light dazzled him, seeming to come from directly in front. It settled and took the shape of a square frame, looking down into a brightly lit room. 7 white-coated men were standing in the room, operating various instruments. Against the far wall, a figure in a drab gray coverall was lying limply on a bench. As he watched, a stretcher was wheeled in, and the body laid upon it. It passed directly beneath his line of vision as they wheeled it out, and the face stared blankly up at him. The frame faded. "That was you," said the voice unnecessarily. "Remember that sight, bub. It's all you'll be seeing for a long time." In the darkness that had followed the glimpse of life, Turatsky felt again a sense of helpless blindness. "Where is this?" he asked numbly. "It won't do you much good to know it," the voice replied. "But you're in the heart of a computer. Not in body, of course, but your mind and identity are separate and whole, locked in here. Specifically, you're now part of one ferrite core in a circuitry containing several thousand. In other words, you're inside a memory bank." With an effort, Turatsky absorbed this calmly. "I'm not dead, then?" "Your body is, although they probably preserve it outside. But your consciousness is alive and will be kept that way as long as possible. We're all lifers here." "Thanks, friend." "Call me Hank, bub." After the initial shock had made itself felt, had become a part of his existence, and then had finally been forgotten, Turatsky settled into his new life without much difficulty. The hours were long, but fatigue was something now unknown, even though there were no distractions to break the routine. For 12 hours of every day, data was fed into his core in binary impulses. He absorbed it, collated it, and stored it. Around him, 2,000 inhabited ferrite cores. Hank and the other lifers did the same. At the end of the 12 hours, they would pool their information, consolidate it into the bulk of the overall program, then feed this by direct link into the huge analog defense computer at Elmira. Then the cycle would start again. About once every 10 days, their computer would be closed down for maintenance work, this being the only kind of rest period the lifers received. Once, during one of these maintenance breaks, Turatsky heard Hank and 4 of the others conferring in minimal micropulse. Only fragments of the conversation reached him. Then Hank said to him, "We're planning a mass breakout, Joe." "You think there's a way out?" An old lag named Constantine said, "There's a new guy here. Reckons he knows a way. Says he worked on computers before he was arrested." "That's right. Ain't it, bub?" A new micropulse, one Turatsky hadn't heard before, said, "Yeah, the way I see it is that we're here for what they call corrective therapy, and we're learning masses of stuff the whole time, right? And—" They never had time to hear the rest of it. The input circuit warmed up without warning, and binary impulses poured into their cores. But what the new guy had started to say made Turatsky do some thinking. He let the impulses collect in his core and tried to carry on the man's line of thought. They were receiving data every day, but what were they doing with it all? It was like catching rainwater in a bucket, then throwing it into the river. Suppose they held some of it back. More to the point, suppose he held some of it back. The next rest period, he took the initiative from the new guy and straightaway approached the others on the subject. Hank was frankly skeptical. "You say we hold out some of the data?" he said. "But what's the point? It's no use to us." The others within hearing laughed. "There must be some way out of this," argued Turatsky. "Otherwise, why should they preserve our bodies? That single fact seems to me to indicate that they're expecting to get us out of here sometime." "That ain't necessarily the case," said Constantine. "What if they keep the bodies just for the sake of appearances?" "Maybe, but this isn't just a penitentiary. We're here for correction. This data coming in all the time, it can't all be for defense. More likely, it's a subtle form of psychological conditioning." The new guy said, "Hey, he's got something there." But the others weren't convinced. Hank, in particular, couldn't see what Turatsky was getting at. As soon as the next shift started, Turatsky carefully analyzed the incoming impulses. A lot of them were of little apparent use to his theory. One was a long catalog of various fuel weights, and another a detailed mathematical analysis of inertia factors on various kinds of moving parts. But other pieces of data seemed to have rather more bearing on what he was thinking of. One was a broad summary of human psychology under physical strain. Another, a justification of total defense preparedness as a basis for government. This latter particular was likely to be straight propaganda and therefore very relevant. At the end of the long input shift, he went through the data collected by the other lifers. No immediate pattern emerged, but Turatsky stored anything at all that he thought might have some use. Data accumulated quickly, and soon he was able to collect more selectively. The lifers compared notes frequently, but he realized that most of the others had no real idea of what they were working towards, or why. Only the new guy, whose name had been Manton, Turatsky discovered, had any kind of method at all, but even he had no really clear conception of how it could ultimately be used. Once Hank said to him quietly, "Listen, bub, I think you're wasting your time. This propaganda junk isn't going to help us any." Turatsky said nothing. Even he wasn't yet sure how his idea could be put into effect. Then, halfway through an input shift, it came to him, and he knew what he had to do. Input data was pouring into his ferrite core at its normal rate. He had long since trained his mind to work against this flow and concentrate on other things. Now, not even sure himself of the mechanics of what he was doing, he cut off all incoming pulses. He held the core in a kind of electronic limbo, balancing the pressure of the input flow against the power he found himself able to exert. Mentally, he sorted the data he held in his memory bank, then reversed the flow. From his ferrite core poured a stream of the strongest and purest examples of government propaganda he could find. All his mental energy poured into the effort, and for a moment he wondered how long he could sustain it. Out it poured, a paraphrased binary stream of patriotic fervor, as artificially reproduced in his mind as it had been implanted there. Hank's micropulse came in feebly against the stream. "What are you doing, Joe?" he said, an edge of panic coloring the tone of his electronically stimulated voice. Turatsky tried to answer, but before he could do anything, he became aware of a total and impermeable quietness. All the time he'd been inside the computer, he'd never been properly aware of the background sensation of movement and noise. Now, in its absence, he was aware of it. An unprecedented silence surrounded him, and he lay inside his core and waited. In his isolation, he thought of Hank, and of Constantine, and of Manton, the new guy, and of the others. It worried him to wonder whether he, in his opportunistic use of the raw material available to them all, had in some way betrayed them. Turatsky opened his eyes. Sensations threatened to swamp him. His nerve ends signaled a surplus of information to his spinal complex. There was pressure on his back from a hard bench, and light in his eyes from overhead arcs, and an odor of formaldehyde in his nasal passages, and wetness against his skin, and cold. The luxury of sensation. Fluid surrounded the lower half of his body and trickled away through grooves in the bench he lay upon. He was in a plastic case, and as he moved, the sides dropped away and allowed more of the outside air to enter. It was excruciatingly cold. Overwhelmed by physical sensations, he moved experimentally and rolled off the bench. He fell heavily to the floor and, with trembling arms and legs, tried to stand up. Using the top of the bench, he levered himself to a semblance of standing and peered around. Attached to the casing, he noticed a neatly printed sign bearing his name. Underneath was the legend, "Rehabilitation Committee. Escaped prisoners. Please report to Block D for rehabilitation." He looked around the vast hall he was in and saw hundreds of plastic cases similar to the one he had been in. Each one contained the body of a man. In the next case to his lay the body of a small, wiry Negro. On his sign was written the name Henry Lucas Wilkes. Turatsky looked at the Negro for several minutes, his hands resting lightly on the lid of the case. Finally he muttered, "Sorry, bub." He shivered and walked away to find Block D, wondering how long he could successfully play his new role of patriot. At the end of the next shift, Hank and the other lifers sensed Turatsky's absence. "The louse?" micropulsed Hank, spitting into the void. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.